Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This video was recorded on Friday, January 22nd, 2021. Today I want to talk about how the globalists are actually monopoly capitalists and why they like socialism. Before I start though, I like to reference Sun Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, what he said about knowing your enemy and knowing yourself. So let's go through that quote, and I think it's really important that we look into this, especially with what I'm going to tell you and the book that I'm going to look at today. It says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So yes, that was Sun Tzu in The Art of War. So the book tonight that I'm going to talk about is Brotherhood of Darkness by Dr. Stanley Montieth. He wrote this book and published it in 2000. I've had it for many years. I probably bought it back in 2004 or 5. Don't remember. I've read it, of course. But I decided to read it again. And I've gone through chapter 1 again. And I think that will be enough for today. Especially with all the talk in the United States, for example, about China, that China is the enemy, the CCP. We've heard that many times before, that they're communists, the Wuhan disease that we've had. But yeah, I don't think China has the best interest of the United States, nor the rest of the world. But I don't think China is at the top of the pyramid. And that's why we're going to go through this book, the first chapter. First of all, let's go through what is said about this book here. In the back of the book, it says, the future has never been more precarious for Western civilization. Dr. Stanley Montieth is one of the very few who places the blame on the Luciferians in high places, who use media, government, education, and other vehicles to control the mind in the long war against God for the souls of mankind. Until you understand who that enemy really is, you are not adequately equipped to oppose it. This book will equip you. That was Dr. Tim LaHaye, author, minister, Christian educator. So let's get to chapter 1. The story you're about to read is incredible but true. It will challenge everything you believe. It is about secret societies, how they have directed the course of civilization, and how they influence your life today. Most people don't realize they exist because their minds have been conditioned to reject any thought of such organizations. Manly P. Hall was often cited as one of the foremost authorities on esoteric philosophy. And when he died, the Scottish Rite Journal referred to him as Masonry's greatest philosopher. In his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, he traced the history of esoteric societies through the ages and revealed that they have left behind clues to their existence in pictures, woodcuts, books, and architecture. You see their symbol every day, but don't recognize them. Whenever you look at the back of a dollar bill, you see their emblem, but you don't realize that it represents the mystery religions of antiquity. I want to introduce you to 3 concepts and 3 poems that will help you understand the story you're about to read. The first concept is an understanding of the forces that have shaped the events of the 20th century is predicated not on facts to be learned, but rather on secrets to be discovered. I have studied history for over 50 years, and the longer I live, the more convinced I have become that it is impossible to grasp what is taking place today without an understanding of the secret societies. As you read this book, you will learn about a number of them and how they have fashioned the modern world. The second concept is men and women become accomplices to those evils they fail to oppose. Another author unknown, that quote. Once you recognize what is happening, you have a moral obligation to become involved. Perhaps all you can do is tell others, write letters, or contribute financially to those who are working to expose what is taking place. If you choose to do nothing, you become an accomplice to evil, and one day you will have to answer for your failure to act. The third concept is the price that good people pay for their apathy and indifference to public affairs is that they are ruled by evil men. Another author unknown. Evangelical Christians are registered to vote, and only half of those registered actually do vote. We must convince everyone they have a moral obligation to become involved in the political process, ensure honest elections, and insist that elected representatives obey the Constitution. Unless enough people are willing to take action, we will surely lose our freedom. Wow, that's pretty important today. This was written back in 2000. Each of the following poems reflects an aspect of the spiritual struggle that is taking place. The first poem was written in 1842 by Lord Tennyson, Alfred Tennyson, Lord Tennyson. It is often quoted by those who advocate world federation. The second poem was written in 1902 by Rudyard Kipling to honor the man who is responsible for many of our current problems. The third poem was written before the Civil War by James Russell Lowell. I will address each poem in turn. When I mention Lord Tennyson, most people will remember his poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. I won't go through the Charge of the Light Brigade. You might want to go through that poem. It's a really good poem, actually. So he says about the Charge of the Light Brigade, these were memorable verses, but most people have never heard of Lord Tennyson's most important poem, Locksley Hall. He wrote it to popularize his belief that Great Britain had a moral obligation to consolidate the world under British rule. I suspect that he had no idea his poem would have a lasting impact or that it would be responsible for many of the tragic events of the 20th century. I also suspect that he had no concept of the true nature of the dark spiritual forces he had engaged and how those forces influenced his view of the world. The poem Locksley Hall is discussed in volume 17 of the 1966 edition of the Encyclopedia Americana. The remainder of Lord Tennyson's poetry and his biography are covered in volume 26. Why is that important? Because those who work within the shadows understand the significance of the message contained in Locksley Hall and felt it should be covered separately. The author who wrote the analysis of Locksley Hall in volume 17 noted that it prophesied universal peace by means of a League of Nations. That has been the goal of the arcane societies since the dawn of civilization, and it remains their objective today. I will quote only the most important sections of Locksley Hall. So this is the section here. For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be, heard the heavens fill with shouting, and there rained a ghastly dew from the nation's airy navies grappling in the central blue, till the war drum throbbed no longer, and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Men, the Federation of the World. There the common sense of most shall hold a fretful realm in awe, and the kindly earth shall slumber lapped in universal law. So this is what he says. 30 years after Lord Tennyson penned those words, Professor John Ruskin, who taught at Oxford University, embraced Tennyson's vision. John Ruskin was a charismatic teacher who had the ability to project his concepts into the minds of his students. He used his lectures to convince his students that they had a moral obligation to disseminate English culture and unite the world under British rule. Many of the young men who sat in his classes were enthralled by his ideas, and they dedicated their lives to fulfilling his dream. When they graduated, many of them entered government service, and by the early 1900s, they held strategic positions in the English government. They were the men who were responsible for creating and then prolonging World War I. But why would rational men want a long and bloody conflict? Well, because they realized that countries would never relinquish their national sovereignty unless they recognized the futility of war. And World War I convinced most people that war was futile. Over 20 million people perished in that senseless carnage. Repeated efforts to end the conflict were blocked. And when the war finally ended, most people and most nations were ready to cede their sovereignty to the League of Nations. I will develop that concept further in Chapter 4 when I discuss Winston Churchill and the part he played in determining military strategy in both World War I and World War II. Other people embraced Lord Tennyson's vision. Edward Bellamy wrote Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887 in 1888. His story began in Boston in 1887 when a young man fell asleep after taking a sleeping potion and awoke in the year 2000 to find the world transformed into a socialist utopia. Bellamy described the world he envisioned with the advent of the new millennium, and his predictions were truly remarkable when you consider that he lived over 100 years ago. He wrote, this is Bellamy, an American credit card is just as good in Europe as American gold used to be, and on precisely the same condition, namely that it be exchanged into the currency of the country you're traveling in. An American in Berlin takes his credit card to the local office of the International Council. The amount being charged against the United States in favor of Germany on the international account. So this is what Montieth says. How could Edward Bellamy have foreseen what is taking place today? Was he privy to some source of secret knowledge? He foresaw large corporations taken over by larger corporations until finally all commerce was merged into a single corporation, the Great Trust. Sounds familiar? The Great Reset, central banks buying loads of assets, World Bank, world currency. Let's continue. This is from Bellamy's story. The nation organized as the one great business corporation in which all other corporations were absorbed. It became the one capitalist in the place of all other capitalists, the sole employer. Universal basic income, mega corporations like Amazon, Google, and others. The final monopoly in which all previous and lesser monopolies were swallowed up. A monopoly in the profits and the economies of which all citizens shared. The epoch of trust had ended in the Great Trust. So this is Montieth now talking about Bellamy. He says, Edward Bellamy foresaw what is taking place in communist China, where all Chinese corporations are answerable to the state. He described the social welfare programs that exist in the United States today, and he envisioned the coming world government when he wrote, so Bellamy again, I who, having beheld in a vision the world I looked on, sang of it in words that again and again during these last wondrous days had rung in my mind. For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be, till the war drum throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled. In the Parliament of Men, the Federation of the World, then the common sense of most shall hold a fretful realm in awe, and the kindly earth shall slumber lapped in universal law. New World Order, right? Universal law. Shortly after his book was published, Bellamy clubs began forming across the United States. So this book was published in 1888. As the movement for socialism and world government spread, a number of wealthy men embraced Bellamy's concepts. Among them was Andrew Carnegie. Most people think of him as a robber baron and an example of everything wrong with the free enterprise system. This view is incorrect. Andrew Carnegie didn't really believe in free enterprise. He believed in monopoly capitalism, which allows those of great wealth to use government to exploit others. Wow, aren't we having that today? I mean, with all the bailouts since '08 and before that, seeing billionaires and the 1% thrive. Andrew Carnegie was a socialist, but the socialism he envisioned created a ruling class. After selling U.S. Steel, he funded several foundations with instructions that their grant-making power was to be used to transform society and promote world government. Why did Andrew Carnegie support those goals? Because he recognized that socialism is a sincere, benevolent, idealistic theory, but it doesn't work without force. Under socialism, the government takes from each according to their ability and gives to others according to their needs. Everyone is controlled by the government. The government is controlled by politicians. The politicians are bought and sold by wealthy men and corporations. Davos, World Economic Forum, Bilderberg. That is why Andrew Carnegie and other men of great wealth favor socialism. Andrew Carnegie embraced Lord Tennyson's vision in 1893 in his book Triumphant Democracy when he wrote, so this is now Andrew Carnegie, "The Parliament of Men and the Federation of the World have already been hailed by the poet, and these mean a step much farther in advance of the proposed reunion of Britain and America. I say that as surely as the sun in the heavens once shone upon Britain and America united, so surely is it one morning to rise, shine upon, and greet again the reunited states, the British-American Union." So, yes, as Sun Tzu said, you need to know who your enemy is. So does this mean that all British people want this? No, I don't think so. I think it's just the elite, the people in charge that want this. And they don't even want the best for the people of this country where I am in the UK. They don't want the best for the people of the United States. I mean, people who are organizing wars in order to bring about world government, like he talked about with World War I, to make people realize that wars are futile by having a war that kills millions of people, right? So I'm not trying to say that the British people, the public here, are against the US. I think the enemy is higher up. It's the elites. So back to Dr. Montieth, he says, 100 years later, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. wrote an article that appeared on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. In October 1993, many people were concerned because we seemed to be relinquishing our national sovereignty and moving toward world government and a new world order. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. addressed that concern. So this is Arthur Schlesinger Jr. The world of law will not be attended by exhortation. Let us not kid ourselves that we can have a new world order without paying for it in blood as well as in money. Maybe the costs of enforcement are too great. National interest, narrowly construed, may well be the safer rule, but let us recognize that we are surrendering a noble dream. Remember those lines of Tennyson that Churchill called the most wonderful of modern prophecies, and that Harry Truman carried in his wallet throughout his life. For I dipped into the future, for as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be, heard the heavens fill with shouting, and there rained a ghastly dew from the nation's airy navies grappling in the central blue, till the war drum throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. So back to Montieth, who says, here Arthur Schlesinger Jr. revealed the little-known fact that both Winston Churchill and Harry Truman were dedicated to world government. Did Winston Churchill really want Great Britain to surrender its national sovereignty? Why did Harry Truman carry Lord Tennyson's poem in his wallet throughout his life? Is it possible that both men were members of the arcane societies? Most people have forgotten the strange things that happened during Harry Truman's presidency. First, he signed the United Nations Charter, knowing full well that the UN was designed to become the government of the world. Then he ceded control of Eastern Europe and China to communists. And when the public began to question why he had betrayed hundreds of millions of people to a life of slavery, he plunged us into a no-win war in Asia. I think that's the Korean War, 1950 to 53. When General MacArthur told the congressman that he wasn't allowed to win the Korean War, President Truman relieved him of his command. If you study that era, you will discover that General Lin Piao, the communist leader who commanded the Chinese army that attacked our soldiers in North Korea, knew there was a secret agreement that precluded us from winning the Korean War. General Lin Piao wrote, and he said, I would never have made the attack and risked my men and military reputation if I had not been assured that Washington would restrain General MacArthur from taking adequate retaliatory measures against my lines of supply and communication. So back to Montieth, this is what he says. At this point, I want to explain how Harry Truman brought communism to China. Most people believe that the nationalist Chinese lost the Civil War, but nothing could be further from the truth. General Chiang Kai-shek's armies were winning the Civil War until the American State Department placed an arms embargo on the nationalist forces, which prevented them from buying weapons or supplies anywhere in the world. Even the weapons they had previously purchased on Okinawa and other Pacific islands were blockaded. How can an army fight without weapons? It can't. Contrary to everything you have heard or read, our State Department intentionally brought Chairman Mao to power. To verify that charge, I quote from a long-suppressed Senate report on the fall of China. Copies of the pages quoted are available to researchers. So I'm not going to go through this report. It's called the Institute of Pacific Relations of the Committee of the Judiciary, 82nd Congress, Second Session, Senate Resolution 366, a resolution relating to the internal security of the United States. This is the conclusion of Dr. Montieth. He says, why did our State Department send the nationalist Chinese guns without bolts? Could that have happened by accident? It is impossible to read the complete text of the McCarran Committee report without coming to the conclusion that the Truman administration betrayed the nationalist Chinese and brought Chairman Mao to power. Why? Could it have had anything to do with the fact that Harry Truman carried Lord Tennyson's poem in his wallet throughout his life? So now he's going into the second poem. I encountered the second poem when I visited my son in Cape Town in the mid-1970s. As we drove down the coastal highway that winds along the base of Table Mountain, I saw a small gray replica of the Lincoln Memorial nestled against the hillside. I was curious, so we trudged up the dusty path that led to the front of the granite monument. Stone lions guarded both sides of the stairway before us. After climbing the stairs, we passed between granite pillars and entered an area that contained a stone pedestal. On top of the pedestal sat a larger-than-life bust of a man. The expression on the stone face was stern, the eyes hollowed so their gaze followed us wherever we moved. As the cold Atlantic wind blew past the pillars behind us, I saw a poem engraved on the pedestal. So here's the poem. The intense and brooding spirit still shall quicken and control. Living he was the land, and dead his soul shall be her soul. So this is what he says about this poem. Rudyard Kipling penned these words in 1902, and they were read at Cecil John Rhodes' funeral. To quicken is to come back to life after dying. And if there was ever a man whose legacy lived on after his death, it was Cecil John Rhodes. What most people don't realize is that his legacy continues to dominate Europe and Africa, and his influence casts a dark shadow over our nation today. The names of most of the men who have tried to unite the world are well known. Nimrod, Nebuchadnezzar, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, and Chairman Mao. On the other hand, very few people associate the name of Rhodes with the current effort to establish a world government. It is well known, however, to his followers and members of the arcane societies. In 1877, Cecil John Rhodes laid out his plan to unite the world under Anglo-Saxon rule. He knew he would never live to see his undertaking completed, but he dedicated his life to that cause, and he recruited others to carry on his program after his death. Cecil John Rhodes has done more to unite the world than any other man in history. When he was a student at Oxford University, he attended John Ruskin's inaugural lecture, and he was so impressed with Ruskin's concepts that he wrote them down in longhand and carried them with him the rest of his life, just as Harry Truman carried Lord Tennyson's poem in his wallet throughout his life. Cecil Rhodes wrote a Confession of Faith in 1877. There he laid out his plan to bring the world under British rule and recapture the United States. He wrote, "The idea gleaming and dancing before one's eyes like a will-o'-the-wisp at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British Empire, for the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule, for the recovery of the United States, for the making of the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire?" Cecil Rhodes acquired the major gold and diamond mines of southern Africa and used his wealth to pursue his dream. In 1891, he established a secret society. When he realized that he wouldn't live to see his vision fulfilled, he left his vast fortune to the Rhodes Trust to fund his secret society and the Rhodes Scholarship Fund. During the past century, over 4,600 young men have been sent to Oxford University, and women as well, for that matter, where they were indoctrinated in socialism and world government. President Bill Clinton, General Wesley Clark, Strobe Talbot, Senator Bill Bradley, and thousands of other prominent men are Rhodes Scholars. They work in government offices, in international banks, on the boards of corporations, in tax-exempt foundations, in the Supreme Court, in the media, in our universities, in the United Nations Association, and in the Council on Foreign Relations. At Oxford, they became part of an elite group that was dedicated to change the world. That is why Cecil Rhodes' spirit still quickens and controls, and why his influence still casts a dark shadow over our nation. So now to the third and final poem of chapter 1. I'm almost finished, and then we're going to go into the people who have been Rhodes Scholars, and the fact that there's also now a Rhodes Scholarship Fund for China, which at the time that Dr. Montieth wrote this book wasn't around. So the third poem was written by James Russell Lowell to address the problem of slavery. The version cited is taken from the hymn, Once to Every Man and Nation. So let's go through the poem. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. Then it is the brave man chooses while the coward stands aside. Till the multitude make virtue of the faith they had denied. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong, though her portion of the scaffold and upon the throne be wrong, yet that scaffold sways the future. And behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. So this is what he says about the poem. Here, James Russell Lowell described the struggle that began in the Garden of Eden and continues to this day. It is a battle between truth and falsehood, between good and evil, between light and darkness, between God and Satan. It has been going on for 6,000 years, and it will continue until the end of time. The past 2 centuries have been the most violent period in recorded history. Who is responsible for the terrible wars and bloody revolutions that have plagued the world? Why did the United States Supreme Court take God and prayer out of our schools? Why can't we do something about the moral depravity that is destroying our nation? When you complete this book, you will know the answer to those questions, and you will never look at the world in the same way. So that's chapter 1. So let's look at the Rhodes Scholars. Not the whole list, of course, but we know that President Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. In Australia, for example, 3 of their prime ministers were Rhodes Scholars, Bob Hawke, Tony Abbott, and Malcolm Turnbull. I think Malcolm Turnbull was also a Goldman Sachs banker. And as for China, I looked it up, rhodeshouse.ox.ac.uk, and it says, welcome to ACRS, the Association of Chinese Rhodes Scholars. So there you go. This has been around, I think, since 2015. It says here, Rhodes Scholarship for China. The Rhodes Scholarship for China was launched in March 2015. 4 scholars are selected every year. The Rhodes Trust aims to double the number of scholarships to China in 2025. So there you go. Let's just go through the list here. There is one guy, for example, who's the head of the Council for Foreign Relations. I didn't know that he was a Rhodes Scholar. His name is Richard N. Haas, Haass. George Stephanopoulos. So who's George Stephanopoulos? Well, he's the moderator of ABC's This Week. He was also communications director for President Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign. Naomi Wolf, American feminist, social critic, author of books including The End of America. Who else have we got here? Susan Rice, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, 1997-2001. United States ambassador to the United Nations. There you go. 2009-2013. Graham Steele, Minister of Finance of Nova Scotia. That's in Canada. There's a lot of Rhodes Scholars in Canada and Australia as well, and places like Malta. Cory Booker, there we go. Former mayor of Newark, New Jersey, 2013 elected Democratic senator, U.S. senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. Wow. Eric Garcetti, mayor of Los Angeles. There you go, Rhodes Scholar. Rachel Maddow, journalist, social activist, host of the Rachel Maddow Show on MSNBC. And the other one that's quite interesting, Eric Greitens, governor of Missouri, 56th governor of Missouri. Here's another interesting one, Pete Buttigieg. Who is Pete Buttigieg? Nominee for U.S. Secretary of Transportation, 2020 candidate for the Democratic nomination for president, mayor of South Bend, Indiana. So let's go back to like 1950 because the Rhodes Scholarships started being given in 1903. John Winthrop Sears. So who was John Winthrop Sears? Member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, governor of Massachusetts. Julian Ogilvie Thompson, South African businessman, former chairman of De Beers and Anglo-American. Bob Hawke, from Australia, Prime Minister of Australia, 1983 to 1991. Here are a couple of interesting ones. Richard Lugar, U.S. Senator, Republican, Indiana. So you see, it doesn't matter the party. 1977 to 2013. Aspen Strategy Group member. Paul Sarbanes, Democratic senator, U.S. senator from, I think, Maryland, 1977 to 2007. So it doesn't really matter, Republican or Democrat. Here's an interesting one here from Pakistan. Shahid Javed Burki, Rhodes Scholar, economist, finance minister of Pakistan. So there you go. Richard Celeste, governor of Ohio, 1983 to 1991. Richard Danzig, U.S. Undersecretary of the Navy, U.S. Secretary of the Navy, 1998 to 2001. So you even have military people, American military people that have been Rhodes Scholar. Wesley Clark, U.S. Military Academy and a Rhodes Scholar, United States Army General, Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, 1997 to 2000. So you get the idea. I'm going to put a link to the list of Rhodes Scholars and you can go through it. And I didn't go through the whole thing, but I just wanted to give you an idea of who these people are. So there you go. I hope this video helped you understand the fundamentals of the globalist agenda and who's really behind it. We will continue to look at this book in the future. I'm not going to stop at chapter 1. Of course, I recommend you buy the book. It's a really interesting book, but I will do more videos on it. Maybe I'll do one chapter at a time. So this is part 1, so to speak. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide and think about subscribing to my channel as well if you haven't yet. I wish you all a great rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye.